to the Author to Authority podcast. And today on the show, I have fellow podcast host Dave Kanyan, and he hosts the fastest podcast on earth called Dumbing It Down with Dave. And he is a 56-year-old truck driver, husband, father, son, friend, acquaintance, and maybe not the best neighbor, but he'll hold the door open for anyone. So, Dave, welcome to the show today.
Hey, welcome, Kim. Thanks for having me.
So, first of all, just tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Dumbing It Down with Dave is the fastest podcast on earth. It's not official, but I'm pretty sure. I do it in my car during my commute to and from work. It's about a 45-minute commute, but it's about a 30-minute podcast. And it's basically somewhat centers around pragmatism, truth, happiness, and the search for it all. And it's a free-form podcast where basically I hit the button. I mean, 99% of the times I hit the button, I start recording, and then 30 minutes later I hit the button and I'm done. It's one take. We have one take, one shot. I write it all as I'm speaking. There's not a lot of dead air. I usually have something on my mind, and you never know what it's going to be about. It could be about something 5 minutes ago, and then when I hit the button, somehow it just turns into something else. And I try to go as deep as possible, but at the end of it all, at the end of 30 minutes, I hope that I dumbed something down for people so I can understand it and they can understand it. And maybe we make a little progress in life.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
So, Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself and your story.
Well, I am a 56-year-old truck driver at the moment. I am a husband. I'm a father. I'm a son. I'm all things to, all people. It's no different from anybody else in the walk of life. I grew up with my two deaf parents, and I think that kind of shaped me a little bit. I am what they call a coda. I just learned this a couple of years ago, actually, and I actually joined this international organization, CODA, Children of Deaf Adults. And when you grow up in that environment, it changes you. It shapes you in a way that you wouldn't behave in certain ways. You wouldn't react in certain ways if you just had a mom and dad that did have hearing. But it's definitely changed me. I didn't know this until several years ago. I have a sister. She's also a coder. She's 2 years older than me. But she joined this organization a long time ago. I just recently did a couple of years ago. So I learned a lot about myself. And it's just a different way of communicating with people and listening. And it's just very fascinating, the differences between somebody who grows up in that household. And also, you might not, I don't know if you can tell, but, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. So that's another facet, that kind of shapes a person and all that. So, and, growing up in the late 60s and 70s and all that. So at some point, I wanted to be heard, especially growing up in a deaf parent household, as a coder. So I think that has something to do with it, that I want to be heard and I have something to say. So if my parents couldn't hear me, I had to find an audience somewhere. And podcasting was a natural place to go.
So does that mean then that you are completely fluent in American Sign Language?
I am as fluent. That's a great question. I'm going to answer it in a very political way. I am as fluent as I need to be. In other words, I am not a certified interpreter. That is something totally different. I know how to say, I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I want to go home. I don't want to do my homework. I'm watching TV. And how come you don't ask my sister to do that? It's no different if you grew up in a foreign language household. Let's say foreign to me, but in a Spanish household, and your mom and dad only spoke Spanish, and you grew up in the United States of America, and the school systems are English, so enough Spanish to talk to your mom and dad. But I don't know if that's enough Spanish to say, well, I can work at the UN starting on Monday at 8:00. There's vocabulary that I lack because my parents didn't use that vocabulary. We didn't talk in medical terms. We didn't talk in industrial terms. We didn't talk certain financial terms, But I was an interpreter for my parents for a long time. But that's because I'm their son. I'm already in the car. I have to go with them anyway, wherever they're going. And so I was interpreter by default. And that would have been really the 100% definitive, perfect next step for me, graduating high school. Ironically, or interestingly enough, that was never discussed. It was
Mm.
never discussed until much later when I was floundering around, like, am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? Am I going to do this? So it came up at some point. Hey, how come you never became an interpreter? Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know why. It never came up. It just never came up. But my sister eventually made that choice years later. She decided that she was going to be an interpreter, and she's doing quite well in New Jersey, for like 20 plus years now. But
Nice.
you also have to have very good hearing, and you have to be able to pay attention. I don't know if I do either very well in either department. So,
Do your parents read lips?
my mother does a bit more than I probably ever wanted to know. My father, you know, I think I got caught here and there. It's hard to tell whether it was her reading lips or it was mother's intuition. But my father, absolutely not. So you had to be careful. But I didn't turn my back when there was something I didn't want her to hear. It's just me, her, my sister for the most part, because my father was always working. But a little bit, she says.
That is really cool.
Yeah, just enough to get me in trouble, but not enough, just enough to get me in trouble, but not enough that the U.S. government would hire her to be, to do one of those deals. Like, hey, what are they saying on the other side of the aisle? Well, give me a minute here, So, yeah, like that. Good enough for family, but not good enough for government, I guess.
So I know one of the things that you focus in on is pragmatism, and I thought that would be an interesting topic for today because we had actually talked a bit about that in our pre-interview. So maybe define what it is and tell us your thoughts on it.
Well, that's interesting. I'm glad you asked that. A couple of years ago, I've been in therapy for a long time, and I was in a session once, and we were talking, and my therapist said to me, Dave, one of the reasons, it wasn't our first meeting. We had several sessions. It would have been fascinating if she had just done this the first session. Would have saved me a lot of money. But and this was like, I don't know, my son is 23, so this had to be 20 some odd years ago. She said, one of the things about you that I find very interesting is that you're pragmatic. Now, I had heard the word before, but just like every other word, steel beam, steering wheel, the color brown. Like, yeah, okay, pragmatic. I've heard the word, but I never had anybody, especially of any authority and experience, with a license, certificate on the wall say, you're a pragmatic. I went, okay. And she said, yeah, well, that's why a lot of these things bother you. That's why your life is the way it is and you react the way you do because you're a pragmatic. You're not a bells and whistles guy. You're not a, you get to the core of things. There are certain basic needs and basic ways of looking at things. It's just a way that you are. And when people in your life are not pragmatic or not as pragmatic as you are, that upsets you, that bothers you, and it has you react in a certain way. And I had never, ever, until that session, had thought about that, considered it. It was like, somebody telling Superman, you can fly a little if you want, really, I always felt I could jump pretty far. I didn't know I could actually stay up there. So it was like, I knew I was somewhat pragmatic, but I never gave it a word, and I never used it as a tool. I never used it as a place of comfort. I like the phrase comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
I just never knew there was a name for it. So yeah, if I could, you might say, hey, I'm a this religion, I'm a Buddha, I'm a this, I'm a that. Yeah, at that point I decided, well, that's something I got to work on. I'm a pragmatic. Then when I say, I study, or I live my life with pragmatism, then it kind of makes me sound like a magician. Like, pragmatism, the ism part kind of creeps me out a little bit. So I just say, yeah, I'm a pragmatic. I try to do things as pragmatically as possible. My friends, of course, are sick of me saying that, so I try not to beat them over the head as a born-again pragmatic. I just do it, and I do the best I can to survive in the society, which in a lot of ways in this modern day is not pragmatic at all.
No.
There's a lot of craziness in the world, but I struggle through every day as a struggle as a pragmatic, because I live in a different world. I'm in a different realm sometimes. Of people. There's a lot of choices in this world. I don't need a lot of choices, and
You like
it's
black
not
and white?
a little bit. Well, it could be two different colors. It doesn't have to be black and white. I don't mind orange and green if it's appropriate. So you asked me about pragmatism and maybe how I define it, or I'm not really an expert on it. I haven't found that book. I haven't found that guy. That guru. In fact, if I could be so bold, I am probably the world's most renowned expert on it, because I'm the one that talks about it more than anybody I've ever heard. I mean, that's also unofficial. Fastest podcast on earth is a little bit more official because I have a speedometer. I can tell how fast I'm going when I record my podcast. But as far as being pragmatic, I haven't yet met anybody in the world. I haven't heard of any author, anybody that's like, oh yeah, this is the guy that writes about pragmatism. But black and white, whatever two colors seem to match at the time, that makes sense, that's appropriate, for that situation. But yeah, in common parlance, you would say, yeah, David's all black and white. But it could be any two colors. It could be three colors. It all depends on the moment, what's appropriate at the moment. I don't walk around with birthday balloons attached to my hand everywhere I go, But if it's my birthday or if it's your birthday, yeah, it might make sense to have birthday balloons attached to my hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. So, pragmatic for the moment, for that particular situation, wherever I am in the world. Right now, it's very pragmatic that I have the windows closed in my vehicle because it's cold outside. I mean, it's not always, like I said, it doesn't have a 100% definite, definition everywhere you go. I mean, for me and for you, it's your thing. Like, hey man, I like my windows open. I like the breeze. For me, that's craziness. You're gonna let in flies. You're gonna let in bugs. You're gonna hear people walking by. It's not gonna be good for the interview. But I'll struggle along with the windows closed. Like what I'm saying. It's for the moment. It's how you survive. It's how I survive. It's been 20 years of this too. I should have a book out on it right now, but instead I've decided to do 30, smaller 30-minute podcasts until I put together enough stories and information and experiences where I probably could write a book on pragmatism.
So you've become a master content creator. So tell us about some of the interesting topics you've done on your podcast.
Well, it's at the time that we're doing this interview, I am at episode 199.
Nice.
My next episode will be episode 200. Yes, thank you. I've taken a couple of podcations, but I haven't pod faded. For those of you who are listening that don't know, podcation is a vacation from podcasting, and I've taken a few of those. And pod fade is basically when you fade out and you don't podcast anymore. And a lot of people are known to do that. So I have my next episode will be episode 200. It'll probably be out by the time this interview airs. Content creator. What is the show about? Well, it's often personal. But not all the time. Very rarely is it political, and very rarely is it like sports oriented. Since I'm a guy, there's a lot of people who expect you to be, oh, it's the Super Bowl. He's definitely going to talk about the Super Bowl. No, but if I did talk about the Super Bowl, if I did talk about sports, if I did talk about politics, because in the United States, there's never a shortage of talking about politics. I try to bring a human perspective to it.
Yeah.
The human behavior aspect of it. Not maybe so much about the issue itself, but about how it relates to me as a human being. Of course, as a pragmatic, but if you keep on saying that 100 times, people get sick of it. So just as a human being, how do I deal with this particular liberty being taken away or being added or whatever? How do I survive in this world with this particular political thing? And but I don't go deep into the politic of the politics. I don't. It's human behavior. Whatever it is we're talking about, the Super Bowl might be human. How would I survive in a stadium with 70,000 people and noise and and the cost of it all and the time it takes, and when I could be doing something totally different involving my family or friends or that type of thing. All human behavior. I always bring it back to a human behavior show. First of all, I'm a truck driver, right? You would think that every day I would have a truck driving thing to talk about, which I could. And a lot of people say to me, you should just do a truck driving show because you were really deep. And I've been doing this for 30 years. But I try not to, because then if I do a truck driving show, I've just alienated or, how many thousands of people, millions of people around the world. So if I do talk about my job, I do talk about my career, I try to bring it to this human part of the world, this human part of my life where it's no different for you as a non-truck driver, but you understand the decision that has to be made, or the way I have to react or don't react, just the human aspect. Every time I have to stop myself and say, folks, this is not a show about Hollywood. Folks, this is not a show about truck driving. This is not a focus about the United States government or any particular celebrity from government. This is about human behavior. And if I keep on doing that, which I think is kind of pragmatic, that's how I'll grow my audience, and that's how I won't pod fade, and that's how I won't, take my next podcast, because I can always find a way to discuss, bring the human aspect and the human behavior into almost any topic, because we're all human. So we all, live kind of the same, breathe, eat, sleep. So there's a definite relationship there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you have a podcast you remember that you really enjoyed doing?
Wow. Yeah, not the first 100. They were horrible. They were horrible. I tell people, if I meet somebody I haven't seen in a long time, or if I just meet somebody they like me, because I go to these conventions and stuff, these podcast movement or something like that, they'll say, they'll get a general positive reaction from talking to me. Go, I got to listen to your podcast. It sounds fascinating. You go, oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Do me a favor. Don't start from episode 1 and think you're going to catch up to me, because, I'm at almost episode 200. I said, just listen to the last couple of 40 or 50, because I've really kind of found my groove, these last, 100 episodes or so. My favorite one, you know what? They're all just like a songwriter, and I think like an author. They're all my babies, If they came and took the first 100 away from me, I wouldn't be that upset. But I'm only so parental about my podcasts. But so maybe that's not a great analogy. But I did one about my sister Dina, because we've had this not the greatest brother and sister relationship over the last 20 some odd years. Things have been kind of tough, if I could be serious about that. It's and it's still very difficult for us to relate. So that was a special one. Talking about a lunch that we had, we had a lunch that I asked to have. At that point, we had not spoken in 19 and a half years. So it was a very special episode, because I really didn't know I was going to talk about that. I actually had just left a book club meeting that I'm a member of. And by the way, I'm a horrible book reader. But, what do you do for free time? Oh, you join a book club. So I was on the way back, and I don't remember what the book club meeting was about, what book we were discussing. But somehow, I think it was like Martin Luther King Day. I think it was something about that. And then somehow, the cosmic forces of the universe, if you believe in that, I believe in energy and stuff like that. I gravitated towards talking about my sister. I didn't know how it was, and things came out of my mouth, from my head and from my heart and wherever these thoughts come from. And I just exposed myself in my relationship with my sister, which is, was difficult then, 2 or 3 years ago. And it's still difficult to this very day. I don't anticipate it getting any easier between now and, somewhere in my third act, when it's all said and done and it's time to leave this earth. I don't anticipate it getting any easier. So, and I'm only basing that on, the last 30 years. So, which is, to some people sad, and to some people, hey, that's life, and that's the way it is. So I think it's episode number 52. My sister Dina holds a special place in my heart, and it was very sincere. I do get very sincere in the show, just like I just did just now, because that's the way you need to be for that particular. It's not a comedy, podcast, and people who know me from my childhood or high school or wherever, oh yeah, I remember you were so funny. I go, yeah, but this is not a comedy podcast. I might say things that are kind of humorous or whatever, but I'm not going for that. I don't go for the joke. Is the basic.
It just happens every once in a while.
Things are funny. Life is funny. You know how you say that? Life is funny. Yeah, life is funny. You say these things. Then people, when they relate to it, I have people who comment, however they comment. I host my show on Spreaker, if you don't mind me saying so. I don't have any relationship with them business-wise, but and there's a comment box. I call it the Spreaker chat box. They leave their comments. They might tweet me, but most people just comment over there, and they say, "Oh, that's so funny. I relate to that." And that's great. That's what I want. I want to say something. As an author, you would write something. I assume you want them to relate to that. Even if you write science fiction, I would assume at some point you want people to relate to your character, even though they're flying through space. I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, all 5 books, the trilogy. It's a 5-book trilogy, the Douglas Adams series.
Yes.
And there's a lot of aspects to that book I related to. Even though it's all science fiction, comedy craziness, whether it was Arthur Dent or another character in the book, I related to that. So, that's really one of the few books I've actually read in my life. I'm not really a good reader, but that's what I want. I want people to say, right, I'm experiencing that right now, or I have experienced that, or I know somebody. So that's how you touch a nerve, and you make a connection.
So is your podcast on any other podcast apps?
I just did a show. I think it was episode 198, where I actually listed, if I knew you were going to ask me that, I would have held onto that piece of paper. I am on basically, I think, 27 podcast platforms.
Well, that's cool.
It's craziness. It's like, remember, like in television, well, in the United States, it was 3 networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and then they added Fox, or maybe PBS. Now it's like, what are you kidding me? It's like there's 27 places you can find my show, and it's insane. So I think some of these apps are really just like something created in somebody's basement, and there's nobody works there. I really believe that. I think if you really dig deep, this is some guy's place, some person's place in a basement. But there isn't an office. There is no lunchroom. There's nothing. It's just located in a thumb drive, next to the freezer in the basement, or the washer and dryer. But it's not really a podcast company platform, so to speak. But yeah, 27, including, of course, if you were looking for the short answer, it'll be like, yes, I'm on, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple, and all this other stuff. And wherever you go, believe me, I've tried. You punch in a name, I'm probably there. I'm on a podcast platform based out of France. And I'm like, where did this place come from? But whatever, you got a book and you're just selling it at Barnes and Noble, you're probably not going to sell that many. But if you sell it at Amazon and all the other usual suspects like Kindle, whatever, now you've opened up yourself to a larger audience. So yeah, I'm everywhere there's podcasts, which is amazing. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. This has been a wonderful experience, getting to share some time with a fellow podcast host. And I've hoped, audience, that you've enjoyed this. Make sure that you check out Dave's podcast, Dumbing It Down with Dave. And as he said, he's on 27 different podcast apps. So I'm sure that you can find it on your favorite one. So this has been Dave Kanyan, and I'm Kim Thompson-Pinder, host of the Author to Authority podcast. Thanks for listening, and we will see you on the very next episode. Bye now.